Hi everybody, good afternoon. It's a pretty dreary Thursday here down the sides of MBR Acres, our resident beagle concentration camp here in Cambridgeshire, responsible for breeding puppies for animal testing. And we've come down here today to give you a little bit of an insight really into the kinds of conditions that these puppies are kept in, are bred in, the kind of conditions that the bitches and the studs have to undergo, and to try and really push home the point that no matter what your position is on things like vivisection and how much you feel it's necessary or unnecessary, and how ready we are for a 100% NAMS approach. All of this is kind of immaterial in my opinion, because having been here on and off for several weeks and seen for myself and smelt for myself the conditions that are around here, even if you are pro animal testing in all of its forms at the moment and feel it is necessary, I feel that every sort of human with a shred of compassion, dignity, empathy for themselves or any other being should be completely and entirely against the conditions that we witness here on a daily basis. And I'm just going to run through you a couple of these things which are probably the most really jarring aspects of the conditions here. Now, the first one that you get here, we have one of the holding pens for one of the units for the puppies. As you can see, we're pretty close to the perimeter here, and the thing that really strikes you at first is how bad it smells. Like, the stench is unmistakable on occasions, and it reeks of death. The only thing that I could describe it as, if you're not familiar with that kind of smell, because you can't mistake it for feces and things like this, is that your cat has dragged in 100 different presents for you over a long period of time and you've never found them, you know, or cuttlefish, and that kind of smell that really permeates through everything. You know, you can taste it sometimes, and it's usually a really bad sign that the death vans are pretty much due to come at any point, and that they're going to do some sort of quick mop up and clean to pretend to be sanitary. And that's the next point really, is the sanitation aspects of these sheds are almost non-existent. You can see the ventilation is non-existent. The lighting is extremely limited and poor. They're corrugated, sheeted buildings. Some of them are former pig pens with asbestos still in the roofs, so entirely unfit for purpose for homing what you would claim to be pathogen-free beagle puppies that are entirely suitable for animal testing in the first instance. Now, what will normally happen is that the workers will come in during the day, but when they leave, there is no interaction with those puppies overnight, generally no interaction with them over the weekends. They don't get to stay with their parents. They are fed with dispensers onto the floor without any supervision. So you can imagine what happens if you've got several hundred, several thousand puppies, all distressed, all anxious, all lonely, scared, all eating from dispensed food onto the floor with no sort of hygiene put into place. It doesn't take a genius to work out, especially after a couple of years that we've had recently, as to how this can be a really red flag, massive breeding ground for things like zoonotic diseases. And that is, you know, a secondary concern really for the primary welfare and the compassion towards these puppies and the bitches and the studs, who are all kept entirely separate with no human contact, no canine contact, and for all intents and purposes are being sold misleadingly and misappropriately, because nothing that's kept under those conditions can be rightfully claimed as being pathogen free. So not only are MBR essentially abusing and torturing these puppies, but they're also mis-selling their product to their primary market, the universities, as pathogen free when it can't be. And also they're misleading the people who genuinely and honestly believe that we need some animal testing in the world for certain products, which is a contentious issue, but some people do believe that, and we have to respect everyone's beliefs. But those people who believe that are not getting what they feel is the appropriate level of standards of care and testing either. So all along this supply chain and production line, from the moment these puppies are born to the point where they go off in the death vans out to the clients to suffer unimaginable cruelty and torture on behalf of cosmetics companies and things like this, every step of the way this is unhygienic, it's irresponsible, there's gross negligence, there's zero duty of care, there's no professional medical ethics, and ultimately there's no protection. You know, if anybody else, such as myself or a layperson, a member of the public, was to come anywhere close to these kind of conditions, you leave an animal on its own for any period of time, to go to work for 8 hours a day, to go out for the day with your children, to go away for the weekend, whatever it is. This would be major red flags for companies such as the RSPCA. Which brings me on to those kind of organisations. What have they done about this? Well, the furthest the RSPCA have come to check in on these standards of welfare is a telephone call to the management of MBR Acres. About a year ago, after the issue was raised with Priti Patel, they gave them a courtesy call essentially, and you can imagine how that went. Of course, they said everything was fine, the standards are there. And what standards are they that we're talking about? Because the RSPCA don't actually have any jurisdiction here at all. The jurisdiction here is written for animals under the Animals in Science, written in the 1940s, which has never been updated, so it's archaic legislation anyway, that has not moved with technology, with medical advancements. And it was written by the Home Office, who, after an internal review, demonstrated and concluded that they were the only government department sufficiently impartial enough to write the act, because every other single department stood to profit from it in a way which just made them entirely unsuitable to even consider the scope and the framework for what these puppies and these animals should be given in order to protect them whilst they are essentially products on a production line in science. And that's what this is. It's not a breeding facility, really. It's not a puppy farm. It's a Fordist production line. You got orders to fill, you perform emergency C-sections. You know, it's not a case of any sort of welfare or any sort of checks beforehand. If they've got the orders to fill, they will fill them any way they can. Just yesterday, there's a video that's gone out from one of our drones, and on that video you will see entirely unsuitable containers being used to transport the beagle puppies, what look like dumpster bins essentially, as temporary transport measures, with some being carried under the arms by people who aren't qualified to do this, and the way they're being handled does not indicate that there's any sort of duty of care or anything there. And you've probably seen by now the artwork on the gate that somebody has left with the word shit show specifically mentioned, and that is really the crux of it. You can't really put it into better words, because the lack of organisation, the lack of duty of care, the lack of surveillance of the puppies, the lack of welfare, the lack of staff. You know, for 2 nights in a row now, I've been down here after 1 a.m, 2 a.m, having a look around, and there aren't even any security patrolling for hours at all. And, you know, one night I was down here till 5 a.m, and I saw nobody. Not even somebody coming out with a torch. And so how can you possibly expect to be looking after, even if it's a dozen puppies, never mind tens, hundreds, thousands, plus sick parents who've just given birth? You know, it's all a complete shit show, essentially. And even after the environmental health complaints have been put in, nothing has really been done about this, and that's because of the way that the science and animals in science law is framed. Companies like the RSPCA and Environmental Health essentially don't have jurisdiction. So this has to come from us, and it has to go to the Home Office. And that's where we need everybody's support. We need to essentially pressure lobby the government, because it's the government, this is state sponsored, and it's the government that we need to change and to shut this down like they shut it down in Italy, and to hand out the sufficient sentences for this neglect and the gross negligence. In Italy they were imprisoned and they just moved their operation here, and Italy has never exactly been one of the countries, bless them, for the highest standards of human and animal rights in the world. Every country has its problems, but when we're that far behind that these kind of facilities are ongoing a decade after they close in somewhere like Italy, that's really, really striking as to how endemic this is, not just as an animal rights issue, but a wider political issue, and the issue that we have endemic in British society, where there's political fingers in all of these pies, and that needs to change. And the only people that can change that is us, through our actions and through our wallets. And yeah, obviously these conditions affects the larger wildlife also. You've got a lot of other beautiful wildlife around here. We're surrounded by beautiful countryside. Deers, new blue tits are being born. There's field mice and foxes and all sorts of things. And we often see cats and other wildlife coming close to the barriers, going through into the compound, obviously attracted by all of these smells and scents, which is going to pass on any pathogenic issues to the wider wildlife also, and that's a huge concern. And that brings us back to the puppies. The puppies, you know, as dogs, they obviously have an extremely attuned and keen scent of smell. Smell is one of their primary senses, unlike ours. And they use that for all sorts of communication and, you know, expression of themselves. And so it's no wonder sometimes I can be down here and the puppies are going crazy, and I can't work out why it is. And it's very, very likely that it's the conditions that they're in. If they've got food that's being contaminated by feces or vomit or pee or anything like that, or if they just can't cope with the conditions, they're winding each other up, they're all getting super anxious and stressed out. Nobody comes to check on them. And so essentially you have this situation where it boils up and boils up and boils up to the point where the only time they calm down is basically when they've exhausted themselves from the trauma. And this is not a one-off kind of thing. This is all day, every day, from my experience in the couple of months that I've been back and forth visiting to date. And that's the thing that really is hard to put across on camera, is just how frequent it is. I mean, you can hear them now. That is not the sound of, happy, playful in puppies. That's restlessness. And that's only a couple, but it's hundreds and thousands of them, day in, day out. And now, just think how cruel and barbaric that is for any sentient creature that just wants to live and be happy, never mind an infant that doesn't know any sort of right or wrong, doesn't have any sort of training of morality, or has been completely deprived of any sort of comfort and love from the moment that they're born, just to be in this, I want to say sterile, because it's sterile in terms of its sensory triggering, but far from sterile in terms of the actual sanitation and the conditions that they're kept in. You put those two things together and it's akin to the kind of sensory deprivation techniques that are used in places like Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib, the black camps and the X camps. And we've got huge swathes of legislation that goes through The Hague for international human rights. And yet we seem to have this double standard and contradiction and hypocrisy when it comes to any other sentient creature that we decide that we need to test a product on before it goes to market. And you wouldn't allow this to happen to your own animals. You wouldn't allow your neighbors to do this to their own animals or to any other animal. You wouldn't allow your children to grow up in an environment where they've learned to not have compassion and empathy for the other lives around them. We teach kindness and love to children. When every child sings "Old MacDonald" as a kid in nursery, they don't think about those animals then going off to slaughter to be eaten for meat. They have a complete disassociation with that. They care about the duck going quack, quack, quack. They care about the pig going oink, oink, oink. It's all love-based and compassion-based. And none of that is present here. And for the people who work here, some of them, you can argue the toss whether they have a choice to work here or not a choice, and that's a separate issue. But they're becoming institutionalized over time. And they're having all of their compassion seeped out of them as well. And we're pushing compassionless humans back out into the world who are then bitter and resentful for the kind of work that they have to do, the things that they have to endure. And it's been enough to shut these people down in other countries. We're supposed to be one of the leaders of democracy and of the free world. And yet it goes on and it perpetuates. Now, the construction of these pens, as I touched on before, is kind of haphazard. Low staffing levels. You can see that there's not really nothing in the way of mental stimuli for them, other than a little bit of a show that was put on recently specifically for a BBC visit. I've never seen the puppies outside, I've never seen them playing, I've never heard them screaming with joy or anything. I've never heard anything but anguish come from this compound. And I don't think that anyone else has ever been here could ever tell you anything differently either. And yeah, I guess that's really what I wanted to hammer home on this one, because for us, it's almost a desensitization. It happens every single day. And sometimes I come down and I wonder, is it as bad as it was yesterday? Am I just remembering it differently? But then every single new person who arrives, they all get hit like a brick with the same really, really striking sensory overload of just how traumatic it is to be here on this side, looking in on it. Never mind being in that compound, inside one of those pens, and never seeing daylight, or never feeling the rain, never feeling the air, never feeling human contact or touch, never feeling safe to enjoy yourself for a moment, until the vans come to make it worse. And so we really do need everybody's support to first sign the petition that's on the YouGov website. We need about another 20 or 30,000 signatories to that to get it into Parliament over the next 3 weeks to a month. And please, if you have the inclination to do so, just however you can, just hammer the Home Office, hammer their emails, spam them, and tell them that this has to stop. If the BBC don't come back and show an accurate portrayal of what goes on here, then we're going to have to try and get Channel 4's dispatches or something to come and do an expose on that as well, because if they don't, then they must be inherent in the kind of corruption that goes on here. And yeah, we need your help, we need your support. So please do come down if you can, or support from afar. Every little bit helps. Do whatever you can. This is me out for today. See you soon. Camp Eagle, freedom, let's do it.